Hello Thistledown gang, welcome back to my channel, if you've already been here. If not, hi! It's wonderful to have you here. Please stay, and by that I mean subscribe. Make yourself comfortable. So my new bedroom has more actual space than any room I ever had to myself before. And I'm quite confused by this, so I bought a sofa. Now this is a great sofa, don't get me wrong, but the space above it was embarrassingly empty, naked you could say, and I just couldn't find a nice centerpiece for the things I want to put there. I wanted something circular because most of my picture frames are rectangular, and I like variety and well done chaos, so I went and made my own. And I went with a flower wreath because I really like flowers and it really matches my aesthetic. Especially if I don't know, put a butterfly knife next to it. I might do that. I couldn't find a large enough wreath base in my usual haunts. The biggest I found was 40 centimeters across, which is ridiculous. So I got myself a €2 kids hoop from the dollar store instead. Of course, I'm German and we don't have dollar stores, but it's the general concept. They are flexible enough, the hoops, not the stores, to easily change their size, and I would have had to cut this one open anyway, because while I do enjoy a rainmaker once in a while, this just was annoying while handling it at some point. I am, by the way, sorry for all the shakiness and weirdness. I am still trying to figure out my new filming/creative space in the new flat, and that's responsible for me not taking the movement of my work table into account in relation to the boards I have my camera on. And of course lighting and things like that, but we'll figure it out. I removed all the plastic pebbly bits and taped the hoop into the size I wanted it. I'm not the type for ASMR, but I admit that I find that tape noise very satisfying somehow. I had thrown out this towel a while ago. It hadn't been in great shape when I scavenged it several years ago, but now it's really time for it to change its vocation to wreath padding. The terry basically holds onto itself, which makes wrapping it really easy. I just secured the ends of my strips for good measure. I'm not even quite sure it was completely necessary. I used the extra material to pad out the transition between double hoop and simple hoop, so it wouldn't be too jarring. Towel's great for padding like this. It gives volume pretty easily. It's a thing you can get for really cheap at the thrift store or emptied flats that everybody has moved out of and there's only towels that nobody wants and the Wi-Fi left. Medium long story. And comes in unobtrusive colors that blend into the background of your wreath. That sounds like I'm an expert. I'm not an expert. I'm just an enthusiast. The slightly see-through fabric for the second layer also clung to itself quite neatly. I guess every textured fabric will. It's only with slippery bitchards like satins that you'd have a hard time fixing it without glue or stitching. For some weird reason, I thought I had a bunch of fake greenery in my hoard. I was wrong. So I went and took a little walk to the two German equivalent of a dollar store stores and got all the nice fall plants I could get, which is actually, there's not a lot of variety for that in those cheap stores, but at least it's affordable. I still spent more on this than I would have liked at a first glance, but then I thought about how much I would have been willing to spend on a centerpiece if I had found one that I had liked. And because I enjoy crafting and don't track work hours when I'm doing it for myself, I came to the conclusion that for the exact thing I wanted, this was still a pretty okay price. It's somewhere in the middle of 2 digits, so it's really not that much, but it's still, I think, above average for someone like me. I have very, very limited experience when it comes to wreaths. As I said with the towel part, I'm not an expert, I'm just really enthusiastic about crafting. I'm quite fine at flower crowns because they aren't as big and you need less material and they're quick work mostly, but I'd never worked on anything that size and never on anything for a wall before, so that was new and a bit scary. What if it looks bad? What if I put in all this work and then it sucks? What if I compromise at some point and think it's okay and then I don't like it a week later? Working through these tiny anxieties, I started out tying on the big branches all around, after cutting the smaller ones off their main stem so I had more separate twigs to work with, and then wove the shorter bits into the wire brambles that the larger pieces had formed. When I came to the lavender sprigs, I was actually pretty sure I was going to be okay with the outcome, so that was a good feeling. If you plan on doing something like this, I recommend using some longer strands that seem to come with hanging plant types or climby ones or droopy things to snake around and between the stiff ones. I sound very eloquent right now, because that just makes it more organic. Now, the thing with a craftboard is that you accumulate a bunch of stuff just because you have an inkling that you might need that particular thing at some point, maybe because it seems useful or maybe because it's very up your aesthetic alley, and these berries fall into the latter category. I say they must be at least 30 years old. The leaves are still paper, and I don't think they still did that in the 90s, and some of the berries are chipped, but I either didn't use those or just managed to hide the spots in the bushes. True to 2020's doing 80s reviving 1910s form, I wanted a big floppy bow on the lowest point of the wreath. I looked through some of my prettier trims before I remembered these very loosely woven scarves that I'd thrifted at some point, with a vague plan of making some kind of top from them. The material is super nice and it would have been flowy and comfy and very great as a peasant blouse with bishop sleeves or whatever I dreamt up there, but they found their purpose on this heap of plastic shrubbery, and I think that's actually quite wonderful. It surely came first, so that's fine. First come, first serve, project-wise. The brighter one really harmonizes with the berries, and the duller one gives it more depth and dimension. I also tied some leftover eucalyptus imposter sprigs together and on there, so the red wouldn't be just an unbroken mass of color. And because I'm me and I couldn't possibly just have a flower wreath, you didn't really think that either, did you? I got out this little garland that I had hanging from my bedpost in the old flat and that I didn't hang back up. Among other things because it was a bit tangled and I just didn't have the spoons to unravel it. My diet is mostly plant-based, but on the final evening of the biggest LARP adventure of the year for me, our group collectively gets roast dinosaur, by which I mean chicken, and I collect the bones each year as well, because if I decide to eat an animal, I want as much of it used as possible. I also just like bones. I wound some string around every bone, and sometimes two really small ones, and then stitched it into the wreath. I wanted to evoke the look of bones that you find in between berry shrubs and moss and tiny sprigs, somewhere in the wood. Nothing sinister, just something that is there as part of nature. To be honest, I wish I had the skills, dedication and/or patience to make a piece like this from dried plants or silk flowers rather than plastic, but it would have been a horror to clean, and I'm also pretty impatient. It still looks pretty good for a bunch of rather cheap plastic greenery. One of my friends called it a very midsummer aesthetic, which I'll have to take his word for, because I haven't seen the movie. I only read the Wikipedia article and decided that, however great the visuals looked, this definitely wasn't for me. I like the idea of hinting at the feral side of nature though, and I decided to call it Feral Cottagecore for this video because I needed a name and cottagecore always does well, I guess. It also reminds me of Vasilisa the Beautiful or other Slavic fairy tales, and my childhood wildernesses and Dark Mori. It's somewhere between Anne of Green Gables and a feral goblin, so that's very much my aesthetic. Or, I'd say, half of it. I hope you enjoyed this non-tutorial project video. Hey, maybe it was even a bit helpful anyway. Maybe subscribe or show this video to a friend who might like it, or put it on Pinterest, or do other things that make the algorithm like me. I would appreciate that. And in any case, have a wonderful time until we meet again. Farewell.